Long before bombs fell on Pearl Harbor, long before headlines spoke of war in the Pacific, the United States and Japan were already fighting each other in silence. This was not a war fought with ships or soldiers. It was a war fought with paper, numbers, radio waves, and patience. And almost no one outside a small circle of intelligence officers even knew it was happening. In the years after World War I, Japan began expanding its influence across Asia. Its diplomats sent encrypted cables across the world. Its navy transmitted coded radio messages across the Pacific. Every message carried intent, strategy, ambition, and sometimes warning. But to anyone without the key, it was meaningless noise. The United States understood something critical. If another war was coming, it would be decided long before the first shot was fired. It would be decided by who could see the enemy's intentions first, quietly, without public debate or congressional attention. The U.S. military began building intelligence units whose sole mission was to listen. They intercepted Japanese radio traffic. They copied diplomatic cables. They stored thousands of messages that no one could yet read. This work was slow, frustrating, and invisible. There were no victories to celebrate, no medals to award. Just endless strings of numbers and symbols that refused to give up their meaning. But those unreadable messages were not ignored. They were collected, sorted, and studied relentlessly. Analysts looked for patterns, repeated phrases, familiar structures, anything that suggested human habit behind the machine-like encryption. They believed that if humans created the codes, humans could break them. By the 1930s, this invisible war had intensified. Japan's messages increased in volume and urgency. Military communications grew more complex. New cipher systems appeared, stronger and more sophisticated than before. Each upgrade was a challenge, and each challenge deepened America's determination. What made this struggle especially dangerous was uncertainty. The United States didn't know when or where a conflict might erupt. It only knew that Japan was preparing for something, and that understanding those preparations could mean the difference between surprise and survival. This quiet battle took place in basements, office buildings, and locked rooms far from public view. While politicians debated diplomacy and citizens hoped for peace, a handful of cryptanalysts were already racing against time. They didn't know it yet, but every message they collected, every pattern they noticed, was laying the foundation for one of the most important intelligence breakthroughs in American history, because soon, America would stop listening blindly. As Japanese communications grew more complex. The United States realized that listening alone was no longer enough. To turn intercepted signals into usable intelligence, America needed a new kind of soldier. One who fought with logic instead of weapons. To secret organizations quietly took shape. For the U.S. Army, it was the Signal Intelligence Service, led by a brilliant and stubborn cryptologist named William Friedman. For the U.S. Navy, it was OP to OG, a small, highly classified unit operating behind locked doors in Washington. Officially, these offices barely existed. Unofficially, they were becoming some of the most important rooms in the country. The people recruited into these units did not look like warriors. They were mathematicians, linguists, chess players, puzzle enthusiasts, and foreign language experts. Some had never worn a uniform before. Many had no idea how close their work would bring them to the center of global events. They worked long hours in secrecy, surrounded by stacks of intercepted messages that arrived daily from listening stations around the world. Each message was a challenge, a locked box with no key. There were no manuals explaining how Japan's systems worked. Everything had to be deduced from scratch. Progress was painfully slow. Weeks of work could lead to nothing. Months of effort might uncover a single small breakthrough. But even the smallest success mattered. One solved phrase could unlock dozens of others. One repeated pattern could reveal how an entire system functioned. The pressure was immense. These code breakers knew that if they failed, the consequences wouldn't be abstract. Misreading an enemy's intentions could mean lost ships, lost lives, or a war entered blind. Despite the strain, breakthroughs began to emerge. By the late 1930s, American cryptanalysts were no longer guessing blindly. They were reading fragments of Japanese communications, incomplete, uncertain, but real. Each decrypted message was a glimpse behind the curtain, proof that Japan's secrets were not as secure as they appeared. Still, the biggest challenge lay ahead. Japan was about to introduce a new generation of encryption, machines designed to eliminate human error and make code-breaking nearly impossible. Many believed these systems could never be cracked, but the American code breakers believed otherwise. The moment the silent war began to turn, Japan believed its newest diplomatic encryption system was unbreakable. It was called Purple by American code breakers, and unlike earlier hand-operated ciphers, Purple was a complex electromechanical machine. Each message passed through rotating switches that changed with every keystroke, creating billions of possible combinations. Even Japan's allies, including Nazi Germany, were never given full access to it. To Japanese officials, Purple was their ultimate shield. Conversations between Tokyo and its embassies around the world could now travel freely, hidden behind a wall of mathematics and machinery. The assumption was simple. No human mind could ever reconstruct how the system worked. But that assumption underestimated the people in the locked rooms of Washington. William Friedman and his small team at the Signal Intelligence Service faced a terrifying reality. They did not have a purple machine. They had never seen one. They didn't even know exactly how many internal components it used. All they had were strings of encrypted messages and the certainty that somewhere inside those patterns, logic existed. What followed was one of the greatest intellectual battles of World War II. Day after day, analysts searched for structure inside chaos. They measured repetitions. They mapped frequency patterns. They compared messages sent on the same day to different embassies. Slowly, almost invisibly, patterns emerged. Purple wasn't random. It was systematic. And if it was systematic, it could be reverse-engineered. The breakthrough didn't come all at once. It came in fragments. A pattern here, a mechanical behavior there, until finally, a shocking realization formed. Purple didn't use rotors like Germany's Enigma. It used telephone-style stepping switches, a detail no one had expected. That single insight changed everything. By late 1940, after months of relentless trial and error, Friedman's team had effectively rebuilt Purple from scratch using American-made components. Without ever touching the original machine, they had created a working replica capable of decoding Japan's most sensitive diplomatic traffic. For the first time, US intelligence was reading Japan's highest-level diplomatic conversations. Almost as fast as Tokyo could send them, ambassadors reported their instructions. Negotiators revealed their true positions. Confidential assessments of the United States flowed directly into American hands. These messages were labeled MAGIC, a name chosen because what the codebreakers had accomplished seemed impossible. But this triumph carried a dark irony. Purple was a diplomatic code, not a military one. It revealed intentions, attitudes, and negotiations, but not battle plans. It showed tension rising. It showed patience wearing thin. It showed Japan preparing for something drastic. What it did not clearly reveal was where the blow would fall. As decoded messages piled up, American leaders began to see the outline of a coming storm. Talks were failing. Japan felt cornered. Time was running out. The codebreakers had unlocked the door, but what they saw on the other side raised a terrifying question. If America could read Japan's secrets, why did Pearl Harbor still happen? While Purple gave the US insight into Japan's diplomatic intentions, it did not reveal military plans. The real threat, the Japanese Navy, was encoded using JN-5, a cipher so complex that even experienced codebreakers struggled to make sense of it. JN-25 was constantly changing, with new additive codes introduced periodically, making every intercepted message a puzzle that refused to yield. The stakes could not have been higher. Japan's fleet was powerful, disciplined, and capable of striking across the vast Pacific. Knowing their movements could save thousands of lives. But until JN-25 was broken, the US was essentially flying blind in naval intelligence stations across the Pacific, from Station HYPO in Hawaii to OP to OG on the mainland, worked tirelessly to crack the code. Analysts pored over thousands of messages, cataloging every phrase, frequency, and numeric pattern. Teams used punch cards, mechanical calculators, and endless sheets of paper, seeking the smallest clue that could expose Japan's strategy. Progress was agonizingly slow. Occasionally, a partial message could be reconstructed, revealing fragments of fleet movements or supply operations. But key details, locations, times, and attack plans remained hidden behind layers of encryption. Every partial success felt like a small victory shadowed by the enormous risk of failure. Complicating matters, the Japanese were not idle. They routinely changed codebooks, added new ciphers, and trained operators to spot patterns that might reveal their secrets. The US codebreakers were engaged in a race against time, always one step behind the changing encryption. In Washington, intelligence analysts and military leaders struggled to interpret the fragments they had. Some messages hinted at an imminent attack somewhere in the Pacific. but the exact target remained unclear. Hawaiian commanders received vague warnings that something was coming, yet the ambiguity left them unable to act decisively still. Even incomplete intelligence was precious. Analysts could anticipate broad operational patterns, such as fleet, deployments, and supply lines. Each decoded fragment added a piece to the puzzle, creating a mosaic of possibilities that could guide defensive planning. By late November 1941, JN-25 had been partially decrypted, giving U.S. intelligence enough to detect movements, but not enough to predict the specific attack on Pearl Harbor. This partial insight created both an opportunity and a tragic irony. America knew an attack was likely, yet it could not pinpoint the when or where. The struggle to decode JN-5 was the prelude to a larger story, a clash of intelligence, interpretation, and human error. In the next chapter, we'll explore the warnings that reached Washington and Pearl Harbor in those final fateful weeks, and how fragmented intelligence contributed to one of the most shocking events in U.S. history. By November 1941, U.S. intelligence was more alert than ever. Intercepted messages, both from Purple and the partially decrypted JN-25, painted a picture of a Japan preparing for aggressive action. Diplomatic cables indicated that negotiations were failing. Naval codes suggested fleet movements. The pieces of the puzzle were there, but they were scattered, incomplete, and difficult to interpret. In Washington, analysts sent urgent warnings to the Pacific Command. Messages marked high priority described Japanese ships leaving their home ports, unusual radio silence in certain areas, and intelligence suggesting attacks in the Pacific theater. The codebreakers knew that Japan had chosen a target, but not exactly which one. On the islands of Hawaii, military leaders struggled with conflicting reports. Some intelligence indicated the Philippines or British Malaya might be the objective. Others hinted at Midway or Guam. Pearl Harbor, though a critical naval base, wasn't universally identified as the primary target. Commanders had no concrete confirmation. Even worse, communication between Washington and Pearl Harbor was slow, fragmented, and overly cautious. Warnings reached commanders in vague terms. Japanese movements suggest a possible offensive. All fleet activity indicates action in the Pacific, leaving room for interpretation and error. Adding to the tension, U.S. policy restricted the sharing of classified decrypts. Purple intercepts, though revealing Japan's diplomatic intent, could not be widely distributed. Only a select few officers were allowed to read MAGIC messages, and JN-5 fragments were even more tightly controlled. This secrecy, intended to protect sources and methods, ironically limited the ability of field commanders to act decisively. Despite the confusion, some individuals sensed the danger. Admirals like Kimmel and army generals like Short pressed for increased vigilance. Ships were ordered to higher alert. Aircraft were deployed on reconnaissance missions, and defenses were partially strengthened, but without precise information. These measures were limited and reactive. In the final days before December 7th, the tension in the Pacific was almost palpable. Every intercepted cable hinted at impending disaster. Every decoded fragment suggested action, but the exact nature, timing, and location remained obscured behind layers of Japanese encryption. The stage was set for one of the greatest surprises in military history, an attack that would strike without warning. Despite the US having already glimpsed Japan's intentions, the intelligence was there, but it wasn't enough to prevent catastrophe. In the final hours before the attack, the United States faced a cruel paradox. It had seen pieces of Japan's plan, but could not see the whole picture. The intelligence from Purple and the partially decoded JN-25 provided glimpses into Japanese intentions. Yet the exact target, timing, and scale of the assault remained hidden. MAGIC intercepts revealed diplomatic tensions and the collapse of negotiations, signaling that Japan was preparing for aggressive action. Messages discussed war with the United States in broad terms. Analysts could read instructions sent to embassies and military commanders, outlining strategies and objectives. But no one message contained the full operational plan. JN-5 fragments provided hints of naval movements. Fleet deployments suggested that an attack was imminent somewhere in the Pacific. Analysts and codebreakers knew the Japanese fleet had left port, but the codes were incomplete. The location of the strike was still obscured by the ever-changing additive codes and the complexity of Japanese communication protocols. This partial knowledge created a dangerous gray zone. Washington recognized a looming threat, but no one could accurately forecast Pearl Harbor as the main target. Conflicting intelligence reports further complicated the situation. Some suggested the Philippines, others indicated British territories. In Southeast Asia, Hawaiian commanders were left making decisions under uncertainty, with no clear picture, even when messages warned of a strike. Interdepartmental miscommunication and bureaucratic delays meant the warnings were vague or misinterpreted. Many officers did not have direct access to decrypted content. The intelligence community's strict compartmentalization, intended to protect sources and methods, ironically prevented timely action. The result was tragic. America was partially informed, aware that danger was imminent, but incapable of pinpointing it. Ships were moored in clusters at Pearl Harbor. Aircraft were lined up on open airfields. Defenses were neither fully prepared nor strategically positioned. Knowledge existed, but the incomplete intelligence could not be translated into decisive action. And so, when dawn broke on December 7, 1941, the United States was caught off guard not because it had failed to intercept Japanese communications, but because partial knowledge created a dangerous illusion of preparedness. Codebreakers had glimpsed the storm, yet the country was still blind to its precise direction. At 7:55 a.m. on December 7, 1941, the first wave of Japanese planes struck Pearl Harbor. The surprise was total. Battleships burned, aircraft disintegrated on the tarmac, and explosions echoed across the harbor. Sailors ran through smoke and fire, many never to see another sunrise. For the codebreakers in Washington and Hawaii, it was a moment of crushing irony. They had been reading Japan's messages for months. Magic and partial JN-25 decrypts had revealed that a major operation was imminent. But despite seeing the signs, The intelligence had been too fragmented to prevent disaster. The Navy and Army commanders faced chaos. The warnings that had existed were vague, incomplete, and scattered across multiple channels. Confusion reigned as officers scrambled to respond. The fleet's positioning, the aircraft's exposure, and the readiness of anti-air defenses all reflected the tragic consequences of incomplete information. Meanwhile, the cryptanalysts who had labored for years were forced to witness the limits of their work. Purple messages, which revealed diplomatic intent, had offered little concrete guidance on specific military targets. JN-5 had been partially decrypted, but its gaps were fatal. The intelligence had predicted danger, but not the direction of the strike. The attack reshaped U.S. military strategy overnight. Thousands of lives were lost, and much of the Pacific Fleet lay in ruins. But in the shadow of the catastrophe, the value of intelligence became painfully clear. Codebreakers realized that if JN-25 could be fully deciphered, future attacks could be anticipated and potentially defeated. Within hours, efforts to accelerate decoding intensified. Cryptanalysts worked tirelessly to reconstruct Japanese operational plans, seeking clues hidden in seemingly insignificant fragments. Every message became a lifeline, every partial success a potential shield against the next strike. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not just a tragedy, it was a turning point. It transformed the intelligence community from a background operation into a critical battlefield tool. From that day forward, the United States recognized that breaking codes could save lives, turn battles, and alter the course of history. The devastation of Pearl Harbor was a wake-up call. The United States had been partially blind, but now the intelligence community was determined to close the gaps. Cryptanalysts across the Navy's OP to OG and Station HYPO in Hawaii, led by Commander Joseph Rockford, threw themselves into a relentless effort to fully decipher JN-5. Lives and victories depended on it. Every intercepted message was scrutinized, every numeric sequence compared and cross-referenced. Analysts began to reconstruct patterns, find repetitions, and exploit predictable Japanese operational behavior. It was painstaking work, sometimes progress measured in a single phrase per day, but it was steady, methodical, and crucial. By spring 1942, their efforts began to bear fruit. Codebreakers started identifying key Japanese fleet movements, revealing an impending offensive against a strategic location in the Pacific. But the messages still withheld exact details. There were gaps, ambiguities, and risks. Acting on incomplete intelligence was a dangerous gamble. Yet the stakes could not be higher. Rockford and his team devised a brilliant plan to confirm the Japanese target. They arranged a deceptive operation. A fake message was sent, suggesting that Midway Island's water supply was compromised. Japanese communications, intercepted shortly thereafter, confirmed that the fleet was indeed heading to Midway. The puzzle was complete. Armed with this knowledge, Admiral Chester Nimitz positioned his forces strategically, setting the stage for the Battle of Midway. The United States had transformed partial, fragmented intelligence into a decisive advantage. When the Japanese fleet arrived, they walked into a trap meticulously orchestrated using code breaking as a weapon. The victory at Midway was not won with superior numbers or firepower alone. It was won with information. Codebreakers had turned Japan's secrets into a lifeline, saving countless lives and altering the course of the Pacific War. The intelligence that had failed to prevent Pearl Harbor now ensured a historic triumph. The story of breaking Japanese codes before and after Pearl Harbor reveals a powerful truth. Intelligence is only as valuable as the interpretation, timing, and courage to act upon it. The cryptanalysts who labored in secrecy, often unrecognized, shaped the destiny of a nation through their brilliance and perseverance. Even after the United States had turned intelligence into victory at Midway and beyond, much of the story remained hidden. The details of how America broke Japan's codes purple, JN-25, and magic were considered so sensitive that they were classified for decades. Revealing them too soon could have exposed methods, jeopardized ongoing intelligence operations, or compromised relationships with allies for the veterans who had risked years in secrecy. Recognition was delayed. Many retired quietly, carrying the weight of knowledge that had saved thousands of lives, but could not be spoken of publicly. Families remained unaware of the crucial role their loved ones had played. The work that had shifted the balance of war existed in shadows, hidden in dusty files labeled top secret. The secrecy also had strategic purposes. Even after Japan's defeat, American intelligence techniques were considered a valuable national asset. Knowledge of code-breaking methods could give future adversaries a roadmap to avoid detection. The Cold War era only heightened the importance of keeping these secrets intact, yet the longer the story remained buried, the more it blurred in public memory. For decades, popular narratives of Pearl Harbor focused on the surprise attack itself, ignoring the silent war of intelligence that had already been raging. The codebreakers' contributions were invisible, their heroism unrecognized by the broader public. Finally, in the 1970s and 1980s, declassified documents revealed the truth. Researchers and historians began to understand the full scope of the American code-breaking effort. Magical decrypts, partial JN-5 solutions, and the brilliance of individuals like Friedman and Rockford came to light. The world could now appreciate the extraordinary intellectual battle waged in secret rooms, far from the front line, yet just as pivotal to victory. The lesson was clear. Some victories are so delicate that they must remain hidden for decades. And the silent guardians of those victories are often the least celebrated. Yet their impact is immeasurable. The story of America's codebreakers is not just a tale of numbers and machines. It is a story of intellect, courage, and the quiet power of information. The men and women who broke purple, partially decrypted JN-5, and monitored MAGIC messages changed the course of history without ever firing a single shot. Their work proved that intelligence could be as lethal and decisive as any weapon. By intercepting and decoding Japanese communications, they saved countless lives, prevented further catastrophes after Pearl Harbor, and set the stage for victories such as Midway, which turned the tide in the Pacific. The techniques they pioneered, meticulous analysis, pattern recognition, and cryptographic innovation, laid the foundation for modern signals intelligence and cyber operations. Today's military and intelligence agencies continue to build on the methods these early cryptanalysts developed in dimly lit rooms, long before computers could automate the work. But the legacy is not only technical, it is also ethical. Codebreaking raised questions about secrecy, responsibility, and the limits of knowledge. Knowing enemy intentions without the power to act fully challenged both leaders and analysts. The tension between knowledge and action remains relevant in modern intelligence operations, from military planning to national security decisions. The story also serves as a tribute to the human mind under pressure. These codebreakers were ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, scientists, linguists, mathematicians who turned curiosity, intellect, and persistence into an instrument of national survival. When we remember Pearl Harbor, we remember the tragedy and the heroism of the sailors and soldiers who faced it. But the full story, the silent victory waged in secret rooms with paper, codebooks, and mechanical calculators, reminds us that wars are not always won on the battlefield alone. Some of the most decisive battles are fought in the shadows by those who see the unseen, decipher the indecipherable, and act when others cannot. The U.S. codebreakers of World War II remain a testament to ingenuity, perseverance, and the enduring power of knowledge. Their legacy is a quiet triumph that changed the course of history, proving that information, courage, and intellect can alter the fate of nations. And that is the true story of how the U.S. broke Japan's secret codes before Pearl Harbor. Being silent, just